A quick disclaimer that I might show some of the things that might disturb some viewers. Okay, so for the contextualizing, I have a sore throat. I can't speak English. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Lady Gaga?
Yeah.
Lady.
Okay. So following the format, I'm going to begin by speaking about my research program. It roughly divides into two parts. In terms of my academic research, most of my work is in the field of photography and animal studies. With the photography, I'm pursuing this through a research group that is working with colleagues in Durham and Rutgers on a project around photography in the transnational politics of affect. In animal studies, I'm working in a research group with Jack McMahon's Institute on animals in the law. And a lot of my work really revolves around issues of animals in visual culture. The curatorial research areas are roughly overlap in terms of photography, representation of animals, feminist practice, and contemporary art. I'm actually working on 3 curatorial projects right now. This one and a project on representation of extinction in contemporary printmaking for Open Studio. And I'm working with Costis and Irina on an international EU Cultural Fund project called Provisional List. The title, Bodilization, I think an awkward word and is not necessarily the final title, is the Chinese curator's attempt to translate the Chinese term Yuusha, embodied experiential learning and knowledge. So we're still working on the best way of framing and presenting what we're trying to do in the exhibition. This is a project that I'm working on with 2 co-curators, Joyan and Fushadong. This is Joyan and I in Beijing. This is Fushadong's gallery in the 798 Art District. It's called Space Station. She also publishes a contemporary art magazine called Fine Art News about contemporary Chinese art. So there's a complex authorship in this, in thinking about how and kind of voice that comes in. This project is one where we've been underway for 3 years. It will culminate this May in an exhibition at the U of T Art Center, which will be a primary exhibition for the Contact Photography Festival. I've talked about some of my curatorial projects at Junior Research Days before. This one is at a much earlier stage in the process than previous projects, so we're not actually sure what we're doing completely yet. We're still in the process of negotiating. Because part of it is refining the concept of the thesis through looking at artwork. Part of it, though, is also about making it realizable. So translating what we want to do into what's feasible in relation to the budget, time constraints, and the available space. So this summer I was in Beijing doing studio visits with potential artists. This is Lian Tingyao's studio in the basement of her house in Beijing. And those are the people who make her sculptures. She recently had a big exhibition at the Asia Society in New York. She didn't want to be in the show, but she took the meeting with us in order to tell us why she didn't want to be in the show, which was that she understood the show as being a show about Chinese female artists, and she did not want to be represented by those categories. In fact, she told us that she turned down being in the Venice Biennale because she didn't want to be known as a Chinese artist or represent China. She wanted to be only representing herself in her own work. here we are meeting with one of the artists who will be in the show, Fang Liu, talking about her video works. And this is another artist whose work we wanted to include, but because of limitations of space, we'll again not make cut. This is where we are kind of with the current curatorial thesis, which is, I had this long discussion with Lin Tianmiao where she's kind of suggesting that she didn't want to be in a show about female Chinese artists, and I'm trying to explain. It's a show in which the works are by Chinese women artists, but the show is about artwork that explores issues of feminine experience in contemporary China. So there's a sociological focus being framed through the aesthetic practice. So it ends up being a show that's all work by women who are Chinese artists, but the show is not about Chinese women artists. And one of the things we've had difficulty with is that a lot of things that look like they should have been in the show didn't make the cut, because when we pushed harder on the underlying conceptions of the work, they didn't actually hold up to the thesis. So for example, we were looking at a woman who was doing portraits of women's vaginas as a feminist practice, which seemed to fit with our thesis about using the body to engage with issues of representation. But she's in Paris doing her MFA, so they're all pictures of French women. So it didn't actually fit with the theme of the show. This is the exhibition space. So right now we're at the point of trying to resolve from this is the whole body of work that represents this concept into what can we make it into that goes on a wall or fits in a space. And how do we optimize the amount of work we can get in the space while also maintaining the coherence of the thesis and thinking about how the arrangement of space will lead people through their experience of the work in the gallery to reveal to them aspects of the thesis. So it's a complicated thing. It's also severely constrained by issues of budget, and because we're also showing a bunch of video work, is constrained by issues of sound leak. So that we can't have two separate voices in the same space talking if the pieces need to be loud, because then they interfere with each other. So it becomes quite a complicated process. So this is where we're at right now, is with a provisional list of artists and works, which we're trying to pull through. So to kind of give you a sense of how this has evolved, we started looking at these questions much more broadly across a range of fields. When contact became involved, we had to shorten our list to just photo and video artists. So we had to drop both sculptors and painters, which on the one hand meant we lost a lot of very interesting work. On the other hand, photos and videos are much easier to move. So it made it a lot easier on our budget. This is Jay Chen's work, The Bearable. This series is her attempt to come to terms with her cutting. So she has a kind of compulsive need to hurt herself, and uses the work to speak to that condition. Based on this work, she then ended up doing a second series called Bees, where a large number of young Chinese women were very inspired by this work to come talk to her about their own practices of hurting themselves, and invited her into their lives to document what they did. And she's kind of using this as a metaphor for the experience of young women in China. This is Li Shenmo's work, Death of a Newly Opened River. This work is documentation of a performance that uses the artist's body to speak to issues of violence and environmental degradation. So, but does it in a way that uses the aesthetics of the situation to invite the viewer in while dramatizing the underlying metaphor of the piece. So you know, the pretty green of the river is in fact a symbol that the sign that the river is dead. All right, this kind of algae bloom only happens when the underlying river is unable to support life. Now she's going into the river at the site in which a raped and murdered young co-ed's body was dumped as a way of kind of symbolically reactivating this sense of what happens to women in contemporary China. This is a piece by an artist named Yuusha. We have two pieces from hers in the show at this point. This is a relational aesthetics piece in which she hired local peasants, sewed them together in groups, and then had them tear themselves apart and leave the space one by one. So it's a three-channel piece, each documenting the activity from three separate angles. One of people tearing themselves apart, the other, the overhead view from the back showing the overall sense of the space, and the third, the view that people at the initial performance saw of the people who've just torn themselves free walking out of the space. So the piece dramatizes issues of collectivity, power relations, and questions of economics in contemporary Chinese culture. It really, I think, echoes the earlier piece of hers we were showing, which is this one, from number 4, Ping Yuan Li, to number 4, Tin Chobeli, which is her talking about her parents' sacrifices for her education, about how, you know, her parents believed that she should do something special, and that one thing that she could do would be to be a musician, so they bought her an accordion, which cost a year's salary. And then she discovered she couldn't really play the accordion. And so she decided to go into art school, so they sold their house in order to pay for her to go to art school. And so this piece is her talking with a razor blade in her mouth about this sense of the burden that's been placed on her in order to succeed by the level of expectations and sacrifice that her parents have made for her. All of this, of course, exacerbated by, you know, the tensions of the one-child policy, in the sense that, you know, she's the only child they'll ever have. This is part of a piece by a woman named Chunhua Catherine Dong. It's called Husbands and I, which explores Western fascinations with Chinese femininity. She's a performance artist who's been educated in Vancouver. And for this portion of the piece, she dressed up in traditional Chinese costume and went around finding men on the streets of Vancouver, asking them if she can pose with them as their mail-order bride. It's combined with this piece, which is a set of performances she did where she then put ads in the paper asking for people who wanted her to be their mail-order bride for a day. And she video documented herself living with the people and acting as their mail-order bride. I can show you a little bit of it.
This is where?
This is in Vancouver. There's no sound.
Over there.
Just like when people think it's weird for you because you don't drink alcohol.
Out that way.
Not that way.
Take off your clothes.
can see, she kind of goes the whole hog in terms of the performance. So we wanted to include this work because of the way, it located the exhibition in a local context, which is to not just say that it's about the specific conditions of women in China, but also the way that there's a whole set of cultural imagining around Chinese women that circulate beyond China. This piece, this is Feng Liu, who I showed you this from the studio. It's a very strange piece, but interesting. I pasted the, I guess I pasted the link on. Anyway, let's go back. But this, in this piece, she goes shopping and then uses the food that she shopped to make art on the streets of traditional Hutong neighborhood in China. So she's playing with the ideas of what makes creativity and about how the possibility of opening the world up to, or experiencing love opens up the possibility of inhabiting the world in new ways. This is probably the most political piece in the show. It's a series of photographs documenting Hua Jin's attempt to track down her extended family in the context of the one-child policy. Right, so it's dealing with the concrete sense that after 2 generations of one-child policy, you're dealing with a culture in which the category of aunt and uncle has largely disappeared. So that what counts as close family then becomes, second, third, fourth cousins. And this attempt to recreate this sense of extended family by traveling across China to various locations and documenting the relationship she finds. Now, the one-child policy kind of works in the same way most other things do, that if you have status and power, you can get away from it. The trick is that kids born in Hong Kong don't count. So there's flights full of pregnant women going to Hong Kong to have their baby so that it doesn't count against their number. This is work by an artist named Fan Shi. I think this is some of the strongest work in the show. These are portraits she's made of the lesbian community in Beijing. As she suggests, these are the first time that many of these women have been represented in topless or exposed themselves to other people. One of the most interesting aspects of this is that she does not want to talk about, or at least from a Western perspective, she does not want to talk about these as portraits of lesbians. She wants to talk about them as portraits of Chinese women because she doesn't think, as she says, it being Lala is a significant identity category in Chinese society. So I think that's one of the interesting things in that when I was heading over there, the Contact Festival suggested that we really needed to have a broad range of gender representation, including potentially lesbians, transsexuals, in order to fit what our categories of what a show that would explore gender would engage with. And one of the things I ran up against was the sense in which the Chinese art world and curators had very different sense of what was significant or important. And given that this is a co-curatorial project in which the 3 of us all have to agree on all of this, it's been a real process of negotiation. So this isn't my work in the sense of I picked everything, it's our work. This is a woman named Ye Funa. These are a series of video boards which she's made based on historical photographs of her family, in which she restages and poses herself in the position and costume of the photograph, while lip syncing to a narrative that the relative has made about their identity and the taking of the photograph. Kind of, for those of you who know contemporary art, it's kind of mixing Ada, Hannah, and Raphael gold chain. This is Le Ben Ben, a series called Original Face, in which she paints herself up as various elements from the landscape, in this case a crane and a leopard, but also as a rock and canola flowers in other pieces, and performs in ways that activate, for the Chinese curators, traditional Chinese understandings of becoming nature. Let's see if this one. No. Okay. And then this is the one piece that's kind of on the edge right now. This is a theater collective called Ladybug Theater. They put together a piece called Riding a Roller Coaster Flying to the Future, which is a play that explored the death by suicide of a young poetess in Beijing who'd been hounded by the literary community for having an affair with a married man. And the piece actually, one of the reasons we're interested in it, uses a lot of Margaret Atwood's poetry as part of working on it. The difficulty we ran into is that they wanted us to present a straight documentation of their play, which is an hour long. So it's an hour-long video of someone's play, which didn't actually work in a gallery setting. So they're now trying to recut it as a short art piece, which if they're successful, we'll put in the show, but if they can't do it or can't do it by the time we need to finalize the list of artists, won't make the cut. So in other words, it's a very tricky thing in terms of finding work that fits with the thesis, figuring out how the parts all relate together so that ideally the whole of the exercise will be greater than the sum of its parts, right? That taken together, that there really will be a sense that the exhibition says something meaningful about the experience of community in contemporary China under these very radically shifting social and economic conditions. Question?
I'd like to hear you say a bit more about the Chinese women artists category and the woman who refused to be in the show. I run up against that myself. As a friend of mine here in Toronto, he's an accordionist. He wanted to record a record of all female composers. He also had a concert, and he got exactly the same objections from two possible participants. And it was really quite fascinating because he failed to understand it. He thought he was actually celebrating their music. And instead they were kind of offended by the idea of being categorized as female composers. And it seems to me there's a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't aspect to it. And I was wondering, did you kind of discuss this with her, or did you just simply listen to her objections?
Oh, we discussed it quite extensively. She started by telling me that, actually her husband told me the story about Louise Bourgeois and the young curator, and how Louise Bourgeois was talking to the young curator, and saying, well, the installer puts the work art up on the wall, I make it, this person does this, blah, 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 everybody else is doing stuff. What is it you actually do? And then I'm sure it breaks down and cries. Right, so just kind of,
discussion.
yeah, this was kind of like the moral of the story is basically kind of saying, well, what are you doing here? I had this is an ongoing discussion with this project, and I had this discussion with people here as well, in which there's a concern with essentializing. And it's not quite a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I don't want to put it like that. It's a risky project in the sense that we have to pull it off. But for me, that's also part of why the Catherine Chunhua piece is very important for the structure of the show, because it explicitly foregrounds that question of essentializing, orientalizing. But I think that this is what I'm holding on to in terms of the thesis. But I think there is a really crucial difference between suggesting that feminine experience is a significant and important subject for thinking through art, and that it's a subject that gets dismissed a lot, and that the failure to take that as a valid subject for art is part of the general social condition that leads to the devaluation of female creativity. But that's a very different thing than saying, let's get a bunch of women. And,
absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And just to clarify, the damned if you do, damned if you don't, I meant from the artist's point of view, because if you do, you're kind of compromising your principles, and if you don't, then you're automatically excluded because you're saying no.
Right?
Matt, that was really wonderful.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know there's a really strong quality dimension of the confessional in these photographs.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you're relating that to, this kind of, these women are, they're showing their vulnerabilities in a really raw way. So I'm just wondering about that aspect in terms of the curation of images, your theoretical approach, etc.
Well, I think it varies. I think the Chipsen piece, the variable, is I think probably the most directly exposing your own vulnerabilities, but also has these sort of go back to that, right? So there's two components to it. These are the body wound images, right? Where it's about her and difficulties dealing with her own embodiment and the need to do things to herself to struggle, to deal with that struggle. And then there's the other component of it, which is the girlfriend series of images, which are these kind of heavily romanticized, idealized images, which in which she projects herself as a culturally lovable, idealized figure of beauty. And so she's both exploring her own vulnerability, but also reflecting and positioning it in order to, not just speak about, not just narcissistic speaking with her own experience, but is in fact engaging, I would argue, quite strongly with the social constraints and pressures that fit on her. And this is, in fact, I would suggest why the series inspired other women with similar issues to trust her enough to document their experiences, because they could see that this wasn't just simply about her, it was about that larger experience as well.
Just a thought I'm reading that it's fascinating, and I think it's a great challenge really that you grapple with in order to bring out the integrity of the voice of these creators. When we start with so many, so different assumptions in a sense, about the legitimacy and there's an ability, for instance, of projecting a gendered representation of self in the public frame, as we do it. You know, and I wonder how much of what you have found by talking to them, preparing this, has taught you about the ways in which we naturalize and we think as obvious in a sense.
Well, I would say it really has made me think quite seriously about the extent to which much of the theorizing that gets done does, in some sense, take North American political, economical, cultural issues as a kind of normalized baseline for thinking through these issues. So that there's a real temptation to think that their feminism isn't as advanced, right? Because they're not thinking the same things as us. And in some sense that's true, in that they haven't been grappling with these issues for the same amount of time, but in another sense, it also opens up the possibility that they haven't gotten into the same channels and ossifications as us because they don't have the social conditions that made us make these choices. So I think you have to try and hold both possibilities open, that there really are things that we might see that aren't transparent because there isn't a strong sense of feminist discourse there, but also that the things that you have to understand that they're probably pretty good judges of what is important to them. Right? If you don't take that as your baseline, then you're in a lot of trouble. Okay? Thank you.
I feel that you might actually have to go before we finish the last two talks, so I would really like you to give me a round of applause to thank you already.